The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. This is Heather Turner, the District 53 Social Media Chair, and this evening I will be introducing Elaine Rogers, DTM, who is a trainer, speaker, and facilitator with over 30 years of experience in corporate America. In 2008, she served as district governor in District 46. She currently chairs the Image Impact International's Train the Trainer program, has conducted this program with participants from the US, Canada, and Europe. She is the past president of LOMA, which is the Life Office Management Association Society of Greater New York, a nonprofit professional career development and educational organization serving insurance and financial industry professionals in the Greater New York area. Previously, Elaine was an assistant vice president assistant vice president of project management at a major financial services company in New York City, where she attained and applied expertise in project management and customer service. And before I introduce Elaine, we do have a couple of housekeeping things to go over. Everyone is currently muted. We are recording this program, and it will be available online on the District 53 website by tomorrow. We do have a question bar to the right of your screen, and I would encourage people to ask questions as they occur to them, and we will address the questions at the end of the webinar after Elaine has gone through her slide deck. So welcome, Elaine, and please take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Good evening, all. I'm sorry, as a trainer, I was looking for the feedback. I said, good evening, Elaine. Thank you for attending the Train the Trainer session. Training is one of my passions, besides Toastmasters. When you walk into a store, you go into any department, you can tell the people who have been trained well. The people who are doing what is expected of them and who know the skills and the knowledge that's required to do their jobs. Walk into a Toastmasters meeting, since I assume that most of us are Toastmasters, and you can tell the same thing. And so training is important. It helps people to know what they're supposed to do and how they are supposed to do it. No doubt many of you that are on this call tonight, you're great speakers. Okay? Some of you may even be awesome speakers. However, that does not necessarily mean that you are also a great trainer, because there's quite a difference between trainer and speaker in terms of the skills that are required. Okay? So let's go through some of those differences right now. If you see a chart, it has differences between speakers and trainers. Okay? This is just a synopsis of the differences, and it by no means does it have all of the differences, but let's just go through them. Let's start with the purpose. Okay? The speaker intends to inform, to persuade, to entertain. The trainer, on the other hand, their purpose is to change participants' behavior through interaction. And keep that in your mind, because we'll be talking about that later. The style of the speaker is generally one-way communication. The speaker may say, okay, raise your hands, those of you who know this. However, it's generally a delivery, one-way communication. The trainer, it's a two-way communication. It's expected that the entire training session will involve two-way communication. When it comes to the method of delivery, for the speaker, I know that you've heard this already. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. On the other hand, for the trainer, the objective is to determine what they already know, determine what they need to know, and then fill in the gaps with the training. As far as the tools used by the speaker, Speaker uses humor, anecdotes, vocabulary, basically the voice and the delivery. The trainer, on the other hand, uses lectures, a lot of different methods like role play, exercise, case studies, demonstration, and visual aids, and asking questions. As a speaker, your evaluation is primarily applause. Of course, you do have the written evaluation, but you get an idea of if you did well by the applause of the audience. On the other hand, what the trainer is looking for is a change in behavior. We're going to work on many of these differences, especially for the trainer, as we go through this session. Okay, here are the objectives of tonight's Train the Trainer session. First, at the end of this session, you will be able to use the gap analysis to determine the training objectives, to create a lesson plan that's based on adult learning theories, choose the right training methods for your particular session, apply facilitative techniques to your training, and evaluate your programs. These are the 5 steps that we'll be dealing with tonight that we hope to achieve in the steps in preparing and presenting effective training programs. If you follow these 5 steps, I guarantee that your training program will be successful. So let's just go through step by step. Step 1, do a gap analysis to determine training objectives. Now let me just stop here because I'm hoping that you have a paper and a pen, because every once in a while I will ask you to do something. And right now I'd like you to do something. The gap, when I say gap analysis, okay, just on your paper, just for your purposes, I want you to just write down either whether you know a lot about gap analysis, that is you're knowledgeable about it, you know a little about gap analysis, you've heard about it, or you know nothing about gap analysis. That's just for you. You're not going to share it with me, and actually we may come back later. Hopefully, if you knew nothing, then at the end of this session you will know a lot, and if you knew a little, hopefully again you know a lot. For those of you who know a lot already, this may be a review, and you're going to keep me honest. So, what is gap analysis? What and what they need to know. So it's current skill level versus required skill level. Okay. Your training itself and the training that we do as trainers fill that gap in between the current skill level and the required skill level. As a matter of fact, that's the whole purpose of training, is to find out what they know and then fill that gap with your training program. Okay. For example, let's take an example of the Sergeant at Arms. Okay. Now we know what the Sergeant at Arms does. Arrives early, set up the meeting room, greet the guests, open the meeting, and so forth. Okay. However, if you're taking someone who has never done the job before, you need to find out what they know about that particular job. So how do you find out what the learner knows about the particular job or whatever you're training on? Ideally, you do a survey. We call it a needs analysis. You send out a survey, find out what they know about the various aspects of the training. You get it back and you're able to take a look at it. That's in the ideal situation. Okay, that's what trainers do, people who do that for a profession. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't have the time to do that, or we don't have all the information in terms of who's going to attend the training. And so what you may have to do is what I call the informal poll. And in the informal poll, basically you do similar to what I did when I was talking about the gap analysis. You ask people to raise their hand. How many of you know, or I should say, what do you know about the job of the Sergeant at Arms? Do you know a lot? And ask people to raise their hand. Do you know something but not everything about the job? Ask them to raise their hand. Or do you know nothing about the job? Once again, ask them to raise their hand. Now what you get is a feeling for the level of knowledge that people have in the training session. I find that in most training, I would say 99% of training, you're going to get people on all different levels. People who say, at least they say they know a lot, some people who know something, and then others who say they know absolutely nothing. Okay. When you get that kind of mixture, basically what you end up having to do is to go through as everything. Okay? But here's a hint of what I do. Since if I do the informal poll, since I have people who say they know a lot and some people who say they know little, and as well as those who know nothing, what I say is I deal with all levels of knowledge. Basically is for those of you who know a lot about this topic, this is going to be a review. For those of you who just know a little about the topic, hopefully you will add to your knowledge base. And if you know nothing at all about the topic, well, you're absolutely in the right place. And I just do that since I need, especially for the people who say that they know a lot, to make sure that they don't tune out on me. So that's just a hint of what I do when I do training. Now, one of the exercises that I do when it comes to gap analysis is one called proud and sorry. And if you've done any kind of training, you might recognize the proud and sorry. And so just, if you can, since you have paper, just write the words proud and sorry on your page. Good. Now, these two words basically can be used, or this technique can be used for any kind of training. For example, if you're talking about to club officers and you're training, you ask them to list on one side of the page the aspects of the club for which they are very proud, and have them list that. And then on the other side, you ask them to list the aspects of the club which they would like to change. Now what that does is you go to the sorry side and then basically figure out, based on the listing of that they come up with, and people may come up with different things, but you'll find some basic themes, then that forms the basis for your training. That's the use of gap analysis, because what do they know and what do they need to, you know what they need to know, but this really gives you an idea of what they would like to know and what they should know. This proud and sorry exercise is something that I use quite often when we do training, because you want to change the sorries to proud. And this way, the participants also get an opportunity to develop their training program, because you're working with the things that they have decided, some of the things that they want to change, what some of the knowledge and skills that are necessary to change. So that's basically it on gap analysis. Okay, when I do training, by the way, for Train the Trainer, it's a 2-day program, and a lot of these topics you spend maybe about 1 or 2 hours on it. But since tonight our training is really going to go for 1 hour, as I go through these topics, if there are any questions, as Heather said, please, you know, write them down, and then we can deal with them. As a matter of fact, if you don't have a chance to write down those questions, then you can always send them to me later on. I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Okay. So let's move on to the training objective. Now that you've developed the gap analysis, now you're going to figure out the objective of training. And this is a step that I think that you should always have or should always do. Okay? At the end of training, you will be able to do something. Okay? And by the way, I know that on a lot of training objectives you hear the word, at the end of it you'll be able to understand the difference, or you'll be able to learn or to know. Please avoid those words. Okay? What you want to do is to get some specifics, some action verbs on here. You will be, at the end of the session, you will be able to, for example, use the Distinguished Club program to set educational goals for your club. Say, an action verb: use, create, describe. Okay? What's good about an objective that has those action verbs is that it helps you to focus your training, but it also helps the participants to understand what it is that they're going to get at the end of training. It also helps you to evaluate the effectiveness of the training. Be specific and detailed, as I said. Use action verbs. And of course, the objectives must be attainable and realistic. Okay, we've done the gap analysis. Okay, we've talked about what it is, how you use it, and how you use it to develop your training objectives. Next, we're going to go into, I think, something that I think is very important: adult learning theory. Okay. Right. Adult learning theory, I think, was developed by Dr. Malcolm Knowles, and he came up with about 4 theories on what you should do as a trainer of adults. Now, I know how many of you remember high school or elementary school. Well, for me, that's too far back. But I do remember sitting there and basically having the teacher teach us and absorbing the information. Once in a while, there was some two-way communication, but it's basically one-way communication, at least when I was going to high school. Maybe it has changed since then. Okay. Sorry, but when you're dealing with adults, that is not going to work. Adults absolutely do not want to just sit there and absorb information. Here's what they want. Number one, they want to be involved in the planning process. In other words, what is going to be taught. That's why that proud and sorry exercise that I talked about previously is great, because they have an opportunity to get some input into the planning process for the training, and they feel much more involved. Okay, you think about it. Think about a training that you've attended recently. Okay. Think about a training that you attended recently that was great and why it was great. And then think about one that you attended that was not so great and why you felt that that was great. Most likely it has something to do with the adult learning. Next, relate the material to their experience. Now, they may not know, when you're dealing with trainers, they may not know the topic, but they bring certain experiences to the training session. Okay? I remember when I was working on my MBA, I was going to school at night. Most of my classmates were 20-something students who had just finished college. And while in some ways they knew a little more than I did, I had more experience. Some of the things that the professor talked about, I could relate to because I had been in the workplace. And it's the same with your adult learners. They bring a certain experience to the training session. So make use of the experiences, and you do that by involving them in discussions, involving them in the exercises. The benefit that sometimes the participants can contribute in terms of their personal anecdotes and the tips, these are things that maybe you haven't even considered. Seeing the need to fill gaps. Well, we already talked about the gap analysis, but that is the fact that when they understand that why they need to learn what they need to learn, then they're much more amenable to learning itself. Okay, that's why it's important to have the participants assess the gaps between what they can do now and what they want to do. Okay, once this is established, you'll find that the adult learners are much more motivated to learn. And then, of course, relating to the material to the daily work, which again is so important. Nobody wants to sit down and listen to a lot of theory. At least I don't. I think one of the examples that we have sometimes is when we're talking about the Distinguished Club program to new officers, and we talk about the importance of the Distinguished Club program to the club and to the area and to the district. And sometimes we don't relate it to the individual. Sometimes it's just an abstraction, because we say, okay, you need to have 2 CCs and then 2 more CCs. Okay. On the other hand, if you said to them, listen, when it comes to the educational goals, especially if they're VPE, here's what you will learn by doing this. You will learn to motivate and coach people to achieve their goals. I think that that's something that they can better relate to, rather than saying, you know, your club will be distinguished if you get 2 CCs. So sometimes we need to relate whatever we're teaching to the person's daily work, it says to their daily work, but also to their own personal objectives. Okay? They need to see the relevancy and the practical application of whatever it is they're learning. Okay? So there you have, in a nutshell, the adult learning theories. Involve them in the planning process for the training. Relate the material to the experience that they bring to the training. Make them see the need to fill the gaps between what they know and what they need to know, and relate the material to their daily work. You know, make sure that there is some practical application. Make sure that it's relevant to their daily task or to their problems, and emphasize how the learning can be applied. Now, I know that I can't see the questions, but I'm sure that you're sending off questions. Hopefully we'll get to them later. Okay, having gone through the gap analysis, we've gone through the adult learning theory. Let's now talk about training methods. Okay, so you have done the groundwork for your training. You've come up with the training objectives. Okay, and you've thought about how to make sure that you engage the adult learners. Okay, so training methods, what are they, and how can you use them to really help your particular training session? Let's go through the first one. Lecture. Many of us sat through an hour-long lecture. It's not always fun. Okay, think about what if you've had a training session. Okay, a great training session. Notice that it probably mixed lecture and some interactive exercise. Recall some of the worst training that you've gone through, and you probably found that the person is lecturing all the time. When you're doing training, okay, you cannot avoid doing lecturing. Okay, that's part of it. But mix in some other interactive exercises, which we'll be talking about later on. Okay, some of the things that you can actually do that are interactive, that will get people involved. Because people involved, they learn better when they are involved, as opposed to just sitting and listening. Which, by the way, is you're doing now on this webinar, and I want to see you. I want to see you raising your hands. I want to see your faces, and unfortunately we can't do that. Hopefully maybe the next time we can have something where there's some visuals. Okay, use visuals as memory stimulants. Okay. It's not, in other words, not just standing there and talking. You need to have something, whether it's a flip chart or some slides or some props, anything that will stimulate their memory. Use handouts, of course, something to take away. And then finally, ask questions. Very important that you ask questions. Asking questions help in several ways. One, it gets them involved by people directing questions to individuals. Then you get a chance to understand whether or not they do understand what it is you're talking about, or if there's something that needs to be clarified. But also, it keeps them involved. Good. So here are some interactive methods that you can use. Role play. I love that one. And if you can do it, I think it, personally, I like the role playing. I did that once with a Sergeant at Arms Club Officer training. And here's what I did. I had 4 people from the audience, and of course, since these are Toastmasters, they're not shy about getting up there. And I had one person act as a visitor, and the other person act as a bad sergeant at arms. Okay? And I asked the visitor to come in and then have the sergeant at arms do a bad job of being a sergeant at arms. Okay. After that scenario is finished, then we had a discussion with the entire group as to what kind of things did this bad sergeant at arms do, and what do they think the results was going to be. Then we had another group, another visitor, but this time it was a good sergeant at arms. Okay. Of course, that person, that good sergeant at arms, had learned from some of the discussion that's going on. So I think it was she really acted out the role of being a good sergeant at arms. And in the meantime, members of the audience were also telling her some things that she should do. I thought that it was a really great way to emphasize what the sergeant at arms does, rather than just sitting down and reading the paper. Okay, now you do this, you set up the meeting. It really helped to solidify the training itself. Role playing is not easy to do. You do have to work on it, and sometimes it can go a little awry. However, it is not only is it a lot of fun, but it's a great learning experience. You also have different exercises that you can use. things like where you're using props, where you're having the participants actually do something, whether it's a group discussion, and then they come back and they report on it. Case studies are great if you've got, I think we have done those in club officer training. They provide some case studies. That is where you use an actual situation. For example, when it comes to why is this club losing members? Okay? And the participants then break off into groups and work on the case itself, and then come back and report on their findings. Okay? And of course, demonstrations. If you've got something that you want to show them how to do it, that works. So any kind of situation where there's the more hands-on that the participants have, the better it is for the learning experience. Participants experience a given situation, they share reactions, the trainer generalizes the situation, and participants apply the principles. Any of these can work along with lecture when you're doing training. It's important, again, that you provide that hands-on training, because people, even adults, learn a little better. Okay, hopefully, let me just go back, by the way, to hopefully that as you're listening to this, and if you have some training in mind, that you will maybe jot down on your paper, some things that you might want to try. And it's not always easy. Lecturing is easier because you stand there and talk. However, getting participants involved takes a little planning, but it's worth it. Okay. The next part about it is applying facilitative techniques. Facilitative techniques, and they come in 3 different things. Okay, let's go through. Good. Asking questions, talking about flip charts and the PowerPoint presentations, questioning the do's and don'ts for using flip charts and PowerPoint presentations, and then dealing with difficult people. So these are the facilitative techniques that we're going to talk about. And the first one is questions. Okay? And I think that we all know about asking questions. We do that as speakers. That's kind of the first thing that we'll ask, is a question. We ask people to raise their hand. And there are different types of questions. There's a direct question where you direct it to an individual, one particular person. Of course, you need to make sure that when you do that, you don't embarrass anyone. Oops. It's okay. And then you have the overhead question, which is where you ask it to the entire group. Open questions are questions where it doesn't require yes or no. You're expecting some opinion, and closed questioning. Okay. You can use a variety of these in your training session. And I suggest that when you're planning your training, that you incorporate the questions. Excuse me. I'm sorry about the interruption. Okay. Incorporate those questions in your training plans. Different question methods to keep the participants involved. Okay, let's go to flip charts. Okay, we still do use flip charts even with all of our sophisticated methodology. Sometimes a flip chart is really handy and it's easy to use. But here are some do's and don'ts, and I know that you have probably already know about these, and that is, number 1, print and block letters. Limit one to one topic. In other words, don't put a lot of things on the flip chart. Use several pages instead. Write on every other page so that there's no see-through when you're talking about something and then you're seeing what's on the next page. Okay. Post important pages, they can tear them off. And then post them somewhere, and then finally make index tabs for reference so that it's easy to turn. Okay. Stand sideways as you write. I don't know about you, but since I'm left-handed, I find that I need to stand to the left of the flip chart in order to be able to write well. Like I said, it depends on your writing skills, but for me, I stand on the left-hand side. Okay. However, one of the things that I like nowadays, and if you go to Staples, is that flip charts are not what they used to be. Number one, they come with lines now, so that when you're writing on the flip chart, you're not going downwards or upwards. You can actually stay on the line. Also, they come with the glue on the back, so you're able to position them, and if you have to post them, you don't have to use the usual masking tape. And I realize now that I'm dating myself, but in the old days, that's the way flip charts used to be. Okay. So, like I said, these are the do's in preparing your flip charts, and it's really a great low-tech way of doing training, especially if you don't have the technology in the room. Okay. Now let's go to if you're using PowerPoint. Symptoms. Keep simple and to the point. Once again, don't put a lot of things on the slides. Okay. Make letterings bold and legible so that people are able to read from the back of the room. Use graphics to illustrate your concepts whenever possible, but try not to use a lot of graphics so that it becomes so confusing to the participants. Show visual while you're talking about it. Okay? And don't show it before you start talking about it, and then talk to the audience, not to the visual. I've been in training sessions where the trainer was talking to the screen, which means that her back was to the audience. Okay? If you have to refer to it, either you have a paper printout of what you're showing on the screen, or you have like a laptop or something, but definitely don't talk to the visual. You may want to glance at it to make sure that what's there is actually what you're talking about, but don't actually talk to it. And then disclose only the points you're discussing. So it's good when you can make what you're talking about more bold. Okay. Okay. So we've talked about questioning, some do's for using flip charts, and some do's for visual meaning things like PowerPoint slides. Okay. Now, let's go to, I don't know why they call this a facilitative technique, but I know that it is extremely important in dealing with disruptive types. You've been in training where you've had disruptive people, and hopefully if you have been a trainer, okay, you haven't had these types, but we need to be prepared to deal with what we call disruptive types, or dealing with difficult behavior. Okay? Now, when I do train the trainer, we spend an hour and a half usually on this one topic because it is so important. Why is it important? Because when you have individuals that are disruptive, they can derail your entire training program. And you spent a lot of time working on this not to have someone come in and really derail what you plan to do. There's several reasons for the disruptive type behavior. One is just various personalities. People have a variety of personalities. Some people have different levels of skills and knowledge. And of course, there are just some people, unfortunately, that come in with an agenda. That's real life. So let's talk about the first type. You've known Mr. or Ms. Talkative. Yes, this is the individual that continues to talk throughout the program. Whenever you ask a question, they will always raise their hands, and instead of just talking about or giving you an answer, they tend to spend a lot of time talking. By the way, the talkative person is not always necessarily someone that is obnoxious. As I had a lovely woman in a training class recently who was a very talkative type. So whenever I'd go through one point and I'd look out to the audience to try to ask some questions, she would be raising her hand and she would spend a long time talking about what she does as a club officer. In this case, it was VPE. Very nice person, but very talkative. The opposite of the talkative person is the silent person. This is the individual that doesn't say anything during the training. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for it. The person is shy. Sometimes you may not even be aware of it, is English may not be their first language. And that's what I've found with most silent types. Okay. I'll talk about what you do about each of these individuals later on. Then you have the crab. Then it's funny that they call it the crab. I call it the complainer, or the person with a negative attitude. They're kind of a chip on the shoulder. And they've got a problem with everything in training. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the topic. They just complain a lot. Then finally you have the know-it-all. Good. This individual not only knows as much or more about the topic than you do, they tend to be a little bit sometimes condescending. Sometimes they will add or correct what you said. And basically, as a trainer, I'm sure that you might have come across these individuals. They tend to be a pain in the neck. So those are the types. Okay. I want you to do one thing right now. For each of those 4 types, you'll find that there is one that really bugs you more than any of the other 3. Just kind of write down. If it's the talkative, just write down talkative. If it's the silent, do that. Crab, do that. Know-it-all, do that. I'll tell you personally, the type that really bothers me the most is the silent person, because I standing there and I'm wondering, why is it I'm not getting through to them? But for you, it may be the talkative or the crab or the know-it-all. Just kind of write that down. And the reason I'm asking you to write that down is because you need to, if this type of person bothers you, then you really need to have a method of dealing with them. So let's talk about how you deal with, first, the talkative type. Okay, the antidote, if you will. Okay. For the talkative type, you need definitely to acknowledge what they're saying. Okay. And once you've done that, basically you do that by summarizing some of the things that they have said. Okay. And then make it clear that you're moving on. Say, thank you for sharing that with us. This is what I heard, and then move on. Okay. Don't argue with them. Just continue to deal with the other participants, but definitely don't ignore them. Acknowledge what they have said and summarize what they've said. And one of the things that I find sometimes with the talkative person, which you want to make sure that they don't monopolize the conversation in training, is that sometimes some of the things that they said is inaccurate. If it's inaccurate, unfortunately, what you may need to do is to do the correct the inaccuracy, because you don't want the other participants to leave with what has been said, the inaccuracy, if you will. You need to clarify that and then move on. But of course, you do it in such a way that the talkative person saves space. The silent individual. Again, basically what you'll do is direct questions at them, where you're doing, we talked about the direct questioning, where you ask them, well, Sally, what is your opinion of this? Okay. Again, just be very, very careful that they seem to know the answer, because if you ask them something that they do not, that you think that they don't know, what you're going to do is push them even further into their silence. So if they look as if they kind of have an answer, then you call on them. It works great if they have an opinion, because what you will find is that generally brings them out of their shell. Once they're able to express their opinion or give an answer, they tend to come out of their shell, and they will tend to participate. Maybe not as much as a talkative person, but they will tend to participate. The crab. How do you declaw the crab? First of all, acknowledge. Acknowledge the complaint, whatever it is, whether or not you feel that it's justified. Okay. Whether it's, yes, I agree, the room is a little bit cold. Okay. Then ask them for a suggested solution. Well, how would you handle this? Okay. Sometimes that tends to, to shut them up, because now you're putting the onus on this individual to come up with a solution. So they can't just sit there and be a complainer. Okay, they're being asked for a solution. Okay. Finally, if that doesn't work, if you find that this person is continuing to complain, ask the other participants, are you also experiencing the same thing? Do you feel the same way? Okay. This helps to isolate the crab, because most of the time you will find that the rest of the audience, they will say, no, we're okay. We are okay with this. Okay. And again, so now the crab is isolated. It's not, you don't do it in a bad way, but you do need to cut them off at the pass, because those crabs tend to continue to complain throughout the entire program. And I've dealt with situations like that. Then finally, we have the know-it-all. Okay. Good. Acknowledge, once again, acknowledge what they said, and tactfully say ask their reason for attending. If, for example, they know it all, ask them just nicely, what was your reason for attending this? Okay, you seem to know a lot about it. And of course, once again, if they don't know it all, you may need to do some correction. So we've applied some facilitative techniques, okay? And those facilitative techniques involved, let me just go back as a reminder, it's the questions, our visual tips for using the PowerPoint, and for using the flip charts. And then, of course, we talked about dealing with disruptive types. Okay. And finally, step number 5, evaluate the program. How did it go? Okay. Now, as Toastmasters, of course, we know about evaluation, and we know that no meeting is complete without the feedback from the evaluators. And it's the same thing with training. You want to be able to get some feedback from the trainers. And feedback on three things. Number one, the program itself. Oops. Sorry about that. The presenter, that's you, and the participants' reaction. First, the program. You want to know if it was successful. Were the objectives met? And of course, since you indicate the training objectives at the beginning, you ask whether or not those objectives were met. Was the material relevant to the participants' needs? Okay. Did they find the training well organized? Were the activities that you used in your training, were they useful in helping to understand the material? So this is dealing with the program itself. Okay. And you definitely want to get that, because it will always help you to make sure that the next time that you do that training, that it's better. And we all like to improve. And then, of course, again, as Toastmasters, we want some feedback on our delivery. Okay. How was our preparation? How was our knowledge of the subject? How did we do in terms of using the visuals? What was the delivery like? Did we use vocal variety? Because even though you're training, you're still going to use all of the tools that we learned in Toastmasters. That's eye contact and delivery. So it's important that you get that. And then finally, the participants' reaction. Good. And this has to do mostly with how are they going to use what they have learned, because that's the importance of training. Okay, you want to change behavior, so you want to find out and ask them the question, how do you feel that you're going to use what you have learned on your job or in your club or in your department? Okay? So that's what we call the 3 P's of evaluating the training session. There you have the 5-step: the gap analysis, adult learning theory, using the appropriate training method for your training, applying facilitative techniques, and finally, evaluating the program. 5 very important steps in a successful program. Training is a performing art. I love that. It is a performing art, and like any art, the more you practice it, the better you get in terms of doing it. Okay, and that's exactly what that means. So, by my time, I have 8:23, which means that we have, I guess about 7 minutes in order to answer any questions that you have. Now, Heather, I think that you have been monitoring the questions.
Yes.
So
I have, and I would encourage anyone that's had questions that may not have yet asked them to please ask them now. We have a few ones in the queue, but we would love some more before we wrap this up. So, Elaine, I'll start with the first one. Can you discuss a little about small group breakout when the group is large?
Okay, well, a lot of it has to do, of course, with what you're teaching. It's good when you say the group is large. I'm assuming like we have like 30 or so people, and I'm not sure when they're asking about what you do. Before you do the training, and if you don't know how many people are going to be there, you may try to decide on what's the optimum amount in terms of dealing with a small group. If you think that it's 5, then you break them into maybe 6 groups. Again, depending on the room size and the set up. And I'm hoping, without some specific examples, I think it's hard for me to actually answer that question, but hopefully I did. Okay. In other words, have in mind how many people you want to be in your small group, in your discussion group, and if at all possible, based on the room layout, then try to keep with that, to break into the group numbers, keeping that numbers within the number of groups. Okay?
Okay, great. And then this is a question. I love the talkative ones that try to take over the lecture. I know that I've always run into a few of those. I've also run into the ones that do think that they know more than you, and I try to be kind.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And then there's a question. I'm not quite sure what this is referring to, but is the evaluation written for them or for the group discussion?
Okay. Is the evaluation written for them? I'm not sure, or the group discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I know who asked this, so Scott, I know that you're still on the line. Could you expand on that question a little bit, please? And then the next question was, Elaine, can you explain what proud versus sorry technique means? Should the participants list what they know under proud and what they don't know, and what to learn under sorry? Please advise. And the comment, thank you, very good training, by the way.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes, I didn't spend a lot of time, and actually this what I'm doing tonight comes from speaker to trainer success communications series by Toastmasters. It's a great program, but actually it's a 4-hour program. Okay, and if you're doing it, and usually it's a face-by-face, but when I do this program, I actually go through, I have a flip chart with the proud and the sorry, and then ask people then to indicate what they are proud of. Okay, and then what they are sorry that they don't see in their clubs. And I'm talking now about club officer training. What is the thing that they are sorry is as, because that's really the one that we're going to look at, because we want to change those sorries into proud. Okay, I hope I'm answering the question.
I think so. Generally, people let us know if we have not.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Let's see. And there was a question for me and for you, and for those that have tuned in later on, where do we have this archived to watch afterwards? We are taping this. We will have this on the District 53 website by tomorrow. It will also be on YouTube with a link. And the question in relation to that was, what trainings would this most apply to? TLE for January and February?
Actually, the principles that I was talking about today is for any training. Any training that you do, the gap analysis, doing the lesson plan, keeping in mind the adult learning theory, choosing the proper training method, the facilitative techniques, and the evaluation. It doesn't matter whether you're doing TLI, I think it's what they're talking about, the Toastmaster Learning Institute training, or if you're training on your job. The principles themselves are basically basic training principles that apply to any type of training. And it's ideal if you can use all of them.
Okay, great. And there was a little bit more elaboration on the question about is the evaluation written for them or a group discussion? And then the point being, is it done in written form?
Ideally, the evaluation is written, because then you have an opportunity to take the questions and look at them afterwards and help with that. It'll help you in terms of improving your training. Okay? So I like to have them written. If you don't have time to get it written, or you're just not in the situation that you can do a written evaluation, you can always ask people, go back to the training objectives. Okay. This is a quick and dirty way to do it. Go back to the learning objectives that you put down. Of course, everybody going to do learning objectives or training objectives, and then ask them to, for each of those, did we meet these objectives? Okay, go one by one. So that's an easy way of doing it, just having people raising their hands. So, but ideally, if you can, have them do a written evaluation, even if it means, by the way, if they can send an email to you afterwards on what they liked, what they didn't like, or what they think can be improved, and any other comments.
Okay, great. And then if we have a small group, 20 to 30 people, what type of setup will be most effective, i.e. roundtables, U-shapes, or classroom style?
Once again, it depends on what you're training. And I've used all different configurations for training. Sometimes it's dictated by my particular location. If you're expecting, of course, to do some group discussions, then roundtables work fine, okay? Because then people don't have to move too much. Okay. If you're not going to have that, and maybe it's mostly lecture, then U-shaped will absolutely work fine, because one of the things about U-shaped is that as a trainer you get an opportunity to move it within that U-shaped, okay, so you can get to both sides of the U as well as the third area.
Okay, great. And let's see. Use the evaluation questions for participants to think about silently or in group discussion.
Oh, okay. Now I understand the group discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right. Usually, traditionally, the evaluations are based on what the person felt about the session individually. Okay. However, I have done group discussion about the training objectives, and there's nothing wrong with actually asking the entire group to talk about, what they think worked and what they did not think worked. But again, it depends on whether or not you're going traditional or you're going to, spend some time in group discussion. The traditional way is easiest for you. The group discussion takes a little more time, but it definitely is worth it. And if you have the time, I would say use that technique.
Okay, great. And in addition to the types of audience members you mentioned, how may we best handle an attention grabber, e.g. a Donald Trump in the room?
Very interesting question. It all depends on whether or not, whether you think that he is the talkative type or the know-it-all, or a combination. He certainly is not the silent, the silent person. You know what? Can you just repeat the question? Because I'm sorry, I was so.
I know that was quite a funny way to put it. In addition to the types of audience members you mentioned, how may we best handle an attention grabber, e.g. a Donald Trump in the room?
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now I understand the question. I think I was so amused by it. Okay. And I think, again, Donald Trump is a talkative person, and again, maybe in some instances a little of a know-it-all. But then I think you'll find that with all the candidates, because they do need to be. How do you deal with them? I mean, you need to isolate them. Immediately. Okay, ask them to. Okay, I know you know a lot about this subject, and perhaps we can talk after the training session. But right now, I want to make sure that other people have an opportunity to talk also. and to get their questions in. So thank you very much, Mr. Trump, for your comments. And we really do appreciate it. But I'd like to just move on.
Okay.
And you may have to, by the way, you may have to say that several times. Okay, it works. But the most important thing is to be tactful, because you don't want to attack that individual, whether it's the talkative or the expert. Okay, if you attack them, because you may end up losing the other participants. But you want to be absolutely firm, because you don't want that training to be derailed by this individual.
Okay. And I'm not sure quite what this was in reference to, but I'm assuming it's the different types of people that you run into in an audience, but possibly similar to the talkative Brevard type, and I think that actually meant the Donald Trump reference. And then there was a question about, will the references be listed or included on the website?
I did not have, like I said, since I'm dealing with the speaker to trainer, I can give you some, I can send you, Heather, some references. Okay. on the train the trainer that I use in my 2-day train the trainer program, if the person wants to go into a little more depth for each of the topics. Like I said, each of the 5 topics that we dealt with tonight, they're each about an hour to an hour and a half, because we actually go through, we work on it in groups, and we use a lot of the interactive techniques like role playing and so forth. So I can send you a few references that I have. Okay.
Okay, fantastic. And then this was from the lovely person that brought up the Trump reference, and I find this very amusing. I'm sorry. Well, and it says possibly similar to the talkative type, as long as he or she doesn't try to buy you out.
Doesn't try to buy you out?
I think Donald Trump actually needs Toastmasters, because the last time, unfortunately, I heard him speak on audio, he seemed to have an awful lot of ums and ahs.
Yes, I think so too. I think he would certainly, Toastmasters would definitely help him with the ums and ahs, and also sometimes maybe to keep to the point that I've noticed in some of the debates. But
well, I think they should make it a qualification that all politicians should join Toastmasters. I mean, in Connecticut, I know, and I hate to pick on him, but I know, and I do like him. Our governor here could definitely use Toastmasters, because every time I hear him on the radio, I cringe.
Yes.
So.
As Toastmasters, we have a tendency to evaluate speakers.
Okay, I would ask if anyone has any more questions to please ask them now. We have approached the end of the current questions in the queue. I will mention that Elaine, and I said, oh my gosh, that, okay. That Elaine has a Train the Trainer evaluation form, and if she could get together with me that request that someone asked about references, I would be happy to send that out to everyone. In conjunction with the evaluation form. And if people could, and I will also attach her email address, but if people could take a few minutes after the fact tomorrow and just fill out that evaluation form very, very quickly and return it to herself or myself, and I will be happy to pass it along to her, that would be very, very much appreciated.
And Heather, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to do this Train the Trainer, and for setting it up and just making sure that everything worked well. And I thought that it worked well, at least on my end of it. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out for you to give this. We really appreciate the valuable information. And again, we did tape this. It will be available on the District 53 website by tomorrow, we do have a tab on the website that says webinars, and we will be actually having some other upcoming webinars. We'll be having a mentoring webinar in January, and we will also be doing some more social media training. There are some past links for past trainings we have done on there already. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight's webinar. We do appreciate it, and I know that it's 8:39, and everybody would probably like to go home and take a nap or have a glass of wine or a nice cup of tea and relax for a while. So I do appreciate everyone taking the time out to attend this webinar this evening, and very, very much a big thank you to Elaine again for taking the time out of her busy day to present to us that. So I hope everybody has a great evening and a wonderful weekend and a terrific holiday. And thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Good evening, everyone.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.